for our new squad, now.
Battlefront II's campaign is a classic example of disappointment due to narrative potential. That is to say that the story told is not an inherently bad one, but when compared to the possible story we could have gotten, given the time period and concept it centers around, it was inevitable that a great many fans were going to feel as if they had been cheated out of what could have easily been a fantastic Star Wars story. So, let's look at why, despite being a passable shooter campaign, Star Wars Battlefront II became such a letdown. Before we get too in-depth, it's important to make sure we all understand what I mean by narrative potential. And I think the perfect way to do so is another famous letdown in the Star Wars universe, the prequel trilogy. If you look at the premise of the prequel trilogy, or the unspoken promise it felt like was given to fans when they were first announced, it seems like it would be impossible to mess up. The original trilogy hinted at fascinating backstory constantly, be it through passing mentions of the Clone Wars.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father.
Vader commenting on his rise from apprentice to master.
When I left you, I was but a learner. Now I am the master.
Only a master of evil, Darth.
Or even just the choice to start off in the middle of a grander narrative. It seemed that George Lucas need only make the decision which compelling and emotional stories to flesh out. Instead, we got trade negotiations, a painfully creepy love story, and a third film which, despite having the most action in the trilogy, somehow managed to reduce the one badass female into a damsel in distress who just wants to walk barefoot on the beach. There was the potential for incredible stories to be told. What fans were given was, well, less than incredible.
Don't do that again.
Just to be clear, I want to state explicitly that Battlefront II's campaign was nowhere near the trash fire that was the prequel trilogy. In fact, I actually quite liked the campaign. It was fun mechanically, though nothing complex, dazzlingly gorgeous, and gave us a look at a time period viewers have yet to see in the films. It's only disappointing when looking at what it could have been. Based on trailers and other marketing, we were led to believe that the story would focus solely on Iden Versio, a commander in the Imperial Special Forces, and span the 30 years or so between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens, answering questions about how things got the way they were in the new trilogy. What we got was a game that spent less than 2/3 in Iden's point of view, and left me still asking, if the Rebels won, why are they called the Resistance? And yes, I'm fully aware that some of these questions might be addressed in books, but a film franchise shouldn't leave such important world building to be done in other non-visual mediums. The whole campaign feels more like an entertaining but incredibly surface-level museum visit, giving us a view of a yet-to-be-seen time period, but failing to actually craft a compelling narrative from an interesting perspective within that framework. Even during the short portions where the story did focus in on Commander Versio and her squad, their stories constantly felt rushed. And this was impossible to avoid, seeing as 5 whole missions of a relatively short campaign are from the points of views of other characters besides the protagonist. Had the whole game been from Iden's point of view, the player could have had more time to get to know her. If, for instance, her decision to leave the Empire took place over 2 to 3 missions instead of half of a mission and a cutscene, the player would be infinitely more invested in her journey. And credit where credit is due, Janita Gavankar as Iden Versio is fantastic. She, along with the entirety of her supporting cast, bring a personable warmth to an otherwise mythical space epic. Their chemistry as a cast was undeniable, and their portrayals of their respective characters were completely entertaining. The trouble was that I felt invested in Iden and her crew in spite of the writing, not because of it. When you kill off the main character of your game, as well as her husband, leaving us to end the game with their daughter, and all I can think is, wow, that was kind of lame. Maybe, just maybe, you need to flesh out your characters a bit. Speaking of the writing, I'd first like to state that I do not blame the writers in any way. Walt Williams and Mitch Dyer have both shown that they are fully capable writers. Hell, Williams is responsible for Spec Ops: The Line, one of the most compelling narratives written for video games to this day. However, given the restraints we can only assume were put on them by the studio system, they're forced to compromise. I believe that, given their way, the pair of writers would have crafted a narrative from solely Iden's perspective, which would have been slightly longer and focused on a more nuanced change in allegiance and identity. Now, this is all speculation, of course. Battlefront 2 might have been exactly the story they wanted to tell, but I imagine they were forced to compromise their original vision. Once again, I had fun with this campaign. I would even venture to say that it was a good one. But when handed the license of Star Wars, as well as the responsibility of telling the story of what happened between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, and all you deliver as a studio is good, something has seriously gone wrong. That's why it's a blatant lie to call Star Wars Battlefront 2 a bad game, but just as dishonest if you say it's not a disappointment. Thank you. This has been Invalid Opinions, and I'll catch you next week.